Welcome to 28.5, where we explore a unique and authentic perspective on the women's game, break down upcoming matchups, and discuss the latest news and trends in women's basketball. We are your hosts. I'm Sydney Story, and I played at the University of Tennessee under Pat Summitt.
And I'm Becca Goodman, and I played at the University of Notre Dame under Muffet McGraw. And we're thrilled to have you join us today. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to tune in each week and support and share the love. Now let's get started with today's episode.
Hey, Sid, ready for episode 11?
I'm ready. Woo. Two really good games that we're about to hit today. I'm super excited about it. This is women's college basketball. It's totally the norm at this point, so I'm pumped.
I'm super excited that we're on episode 11 and that we have great content to continually talk about. And let's get rolling. So first quarter, we're going to dive into the Iowa State versus Iowa matchup, that nice in-state rivalry there. Then we're going to hit on some in the news. Third quarter, starting off our second half, we're going to jump into the UConn versus Notre Dame game. Rivalries at its finest. And then we're going to do an in the news too for the fourth quarter. A lot of busy stuff. Obviously, you have two big games we want to kind of dig into a bit more. So let's get started. First quarter, let's roll.
Let's do it. So that Iowa versus Iowa State game, we mentioned how big this rivalry is. It's for obvious reasons, right? It's for the state of Iowa. And when you look at both of these programs this year, both in the top 25, Iowa's coming off of back-to-back seasons where they played in that Final Four. Iowa State has some star-studded players, starting with Audie Crooks, who's one of the best post players in the country. And when you talk about both of these programs and what they bring, it really sets it up for a great matchup. Heading into this one, the Hawkeyes won last season's matchup 67-58 at Iowa State. The game that we just watched was at Iowa. And boy, did Iowa bring that six-man. That crowd looked insane. They were so into it. You can tell these Iowa fans are loving women's basketball. And Caitlin Clark leaving, you wouldn't even have known. I mean, it was packed in that gym, and they were absolutely into it, which was really cool to see. But anyways, the Hawkeyes were 8-2 in the last 10 of the Cy-Hawk matchups. I was doing a little research on this, and a couple times I came across Cy-Hawk, and I'm like, that's kind of cool. That's a cool way to talk about the rivalry between both those mascots.
Yeah.
Iowa leads the all-time series so far, 31-23 heading into the game. It's that Big 12 versus Big 10 matchup that's also fun in this one. And when you talk about the players for both teams, Audie Crooks coming into this game was averaging 19.8 points per game, shooting 58% from the field. Really tough to stop her. She is that mismatch for nearly every team in the country right now. And then we talk about Emily Ryan. I've mentioned a couple of times, I call her the assist queen. She comes in this game averaging 7.2 assists per game. And then on the Iowa side, Hannah Stolke, who was huge for them last year, also huge for them this year. She comes into this game averaging 13.6 points per game, 7.4 rebounds per game. She is that athletic track star type player who is capable of doing so many things on the court for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And then Lucy Olson. She's that transfer player this year for Iowa. And man, is she a scorer. She comes into this game averaging 18.1 points per game, which is 7th in the Big Ten, which is crazy to me. I'm like, how is that only 7th in the Big Ten? But it just shows how many scorers are out there. That's just in the Big Ten alone, right? We're going to talk a lot about Lucy Olson in the matchup that just happened, but wanted to give some of the highlights across the board for both teams. And for me, when I look at this one, Iowa State led this game against Iowa for 33 minutes. So majority of the game, they really had the upper hand control a little bit, but Iowa never went away. They got down by as much as 10, but boy, did they fight. And I think part of it is the crowd that's there, the in-state rivalry we talk about. Like when you're playing these rivalry games, no matter how much you get down by, you're fighting every minute of this game. And I think that paid off for Iowa, that they just stayed persistent and they never went away. To me, heading into this game, the biggest question in my mind was, how does each team stop some of those big scorers? So how does Iowa match up against Audie Crooks and stop her big body post presence down low? And then on the flip side, how does Iowa State stop Lucy Olson, who's a dynamic scorer, one of the best scorers in the conference, in the Big Ten, and in the country? And that's the big thing to me. And when you watch the game, They put O'Grady on Audie Crooks. Granted, Iowa wins this game, so you can turn around and say, hey, it worked, right? Audie got our points, but we were able to do other things and shut down enough people where, we win the game, we walk away. But I was a little shocked by that. To me, is O'Grady a great player? She is. She's been stepping up this year. I think even more than last year. She's had that inside presence. But to me, when you're playing Audie Crooks, if you're going to try to play her one-on-one and not send doubles at her consistently, you put your best athlete on her. So I was a little bit shocked on that one, right? Hannah Stolke, she's been playing more on the wing this year, but really she is that best athlete on the floor. She's tested down low. And to me, if you're going to stop Audie Crooks, who ultimately went off for 31 points for Iowa State, you got to put some athleticism on her. You got to put somebody who's capable of maybe shutting her down a little bit more. And there were a couple times when Hannah Stolke got switched off on her. That happens in the game. You're going to switch from the post-to-post action. They're able to do that with O'Grady and Stolke. But really, they put O'Grady on her most of the game. What were your thoughts on that one, Becca, having played the post game at a big level like this?
Yeah, Addison O'Grady did a really good job, but Hannah just has the experience. And Audie Crooks is the type of post player you have to meet her early, keep her out of the paint, and when she gets in the paint, you have to get in front and push her down underneath the basket. I loved when they made that change toward the end of the game where like Addison, she sat out quite a bit the last quarter, and they really had Hannah in there. Hannah was able to get steal after steal. I think there was 2 or 3 times back to back to back that she would come down and she was fronting, and when on that pass, she was pushing Crooks back underneath the basket to jump and get that tip. And whether it was inbounds or out of bounds, at one point she got a tip, but it went out of bounds, but she just pumped at that point. And that takes a lot of wind out of your sails. If you're the opposing team, you're trying to get the ball into your post player who's getting a 30 piece, and you were winning in the game, and now it's too close for comfort. The crowd is raging. It's discombobulating, to say the least, right? So I thought that was the smartest move that Jan Jensen made, was kind of just making Hannah be the sole defender for Audie Crooks, giving her, as you mentioned, putting the best athlete on there to really make Audie work in a different way. Hannah's able to get out and around, spin, and not only that, if she gets the steal, outlet and run, I mean, she's going to beat guards down the floor. So it's a win-win. I think they were probably, I know Hannah's trying to play like a stretch 4, handle the ball a bit more, but sometimes going back to the basics, it's the best thing for you. So I thought Hannah did a great job.
Yeah, me too. And when you talk about Audie Crooks and the matchup challenge she really is, to me, she is one of the best players in the country right now with getting that position early and often. She is very physical. You know that going in that you're going to have to meet and match her physicality. But then on top of it, they'll play the inside-outside game with her quite a bit. And the second the ball comes into her, she's not looking maybe to score right away. If she is looking to score, it's happening right away. She's turning and the ball's going up. And a lot of the times it's going through the hoop, right? That field goal percentage we talked about. And it certainly showed through against Iowa. But if she's not turning and shooting, she's kicking the ball back out, and then she's double burying, she's reposting, she's pushing that defender even further back behind the basket and creating that much of an opportunity for her to turn and score. And when you watch her footwork, when you watch her overall mentality for having a knack for the ball and having a knack for scoring, she is like so much fun to watch. Yeah. She is a refreshing post player to watch. I think she's got, unlike anyone else in the country, she has a unique post game right now, and it's really cool. I hope there's a lot of young players that maybe have some size and are strictly post players like Audie Crooks is. I hope they're watching her because she can really flat out play the post game.
Yeah, and I think she does things that it's like old school basketball in a way, but it's still so successful. And if you have the make and body type for that type of style of play, here's how you become successful. Here's how you play D1 basketball, get your college paid for, have an amazing experience, and I don't know, average almost 30 points and a double-double. Like, be successful, create your own way. And I mean, Iowa State's nobody to play with. I'm really glad this game, I understand they lost, but Iowa State there for a minute, I just, right, they were in the top 10. I think they were like 8 at one point, and they've had some upsets that I felt were a little uncharacteristic, or just maybe early growing pains of trying to figure out your place, your game, how you're, being a top 10 team for the first time consistently, and how do you handle that pressure? I am really excited of how they played for that first 33 minutes. I just think Iowa was able to make those veteran in-game adjustments to get back to back to back stops to create that lead. And when you have a player like Hannah Stolke and Lucy Olson, who may not be a player from, experience with Iowa, but that girl's a vet, right? She was at Villanova putting up numbers, so she knows time and possession and when she needs to score. And then you had Sydney Fulter for Iowa, right? Injured last year, came back, kind of been iffy. I know to see her play and play well at home is huge for them. She's just one of those girls that played really well off of Caitlin Clark, and to see her back and kind of in the flow, it was great to see. She finished with 16 and 6 rebounds, and I thought those were huge for Iowa.
And when you look at the entirety of the game, to start the game, the Hawkeyes were 0 for 6 from the three-point land in the first quarter. Iowa State goes 3 for 3. In that first quarter, 18 of the 20 points came from Audie Crooks and Brown. Brown gets in foul trouble. She picks up 3 fouls in the first half. She comes out of that game. To me, if I look at that, and one of the things that hurt Iowa State the most was her getting taken out of her game, because she comes back in the second half. She only has 4 more points. She finishes with 13. It kind of took her out of it. In that first half, you could tell the fire she had in her eyes. That was the rivalry was coming through. She wanted to beat Iowa so bad, and then kind of got taken out of the game, which was a blessing for I think a blessing for Iowa, because I think she's a very good player. And then when I also look at Iowa State, they had 9 turnovers in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. They had 21 total turnovers. And I think that absolutely crippled them, especially down the stretch. Those 9 turnovers in the fourth quarter allowed Iowa to go on a 9-0 run in the fourth quarter, and they really capitalized. That's where Iowa, you mentioned it, they're veteran players. They've got a lot of vets out there. That's where Iowa capitalized the most. I think they really exploited those turnovers when they needed to. They got the momentum going that fourth quarter, and it was kind of like at one point, I'm like, man, this thing's over, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of knew, you could sense when it was over, when I was just like, put the hammer down and like, this is our court, this is our game, and they finished it out. I also think that the free throw line was awful for both teams, actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking down the stat line and I'm like, wow, okay, Iowa State goes 4 for 11. Iowa goes 4 for 10 from the free throw line. I mean, watching the game, it was almost painful. And Audie Crooks, she shoots really well in game, pressure in her face, can knock down jumpers. And then she gets to the free throw line and you're like, oh my gosh, these are free. And this is the easy part. This is the easy part of shooting. And really it has to be a mental thing for her where she's choking herself up a little bit. And that happens, right? But I think that's something that she could fix in her game that's going to make her that much better. Audie Crooks goes 3 for 10 from the free throw line, and Iowa State goes 6 for 16. So when you consider you lose the game by 6 and you go 37.5% from the free throw line, are you kicking yourself after that game? Knock down free throws. That's huge.
Right. I also think it's interesting that Iowa, and this is where a lot of people who watch the game, right, they might say, I don't understand how they lost that one. Because Iowa State they had a better field goal percentage and a better 3-point field goal percentage, and their points in the paint was 40-26. So all the scoring you're seeing, that was they were up. They had it in the bag. But when you look at Iowa, all those intangible things that you can't teach on form shooting and reps on reps, and 12 steals, 7 blocks. They took care of the ball and had 9 turnovers. And, when Iowa State turns it over 21 times, Iowa has 24 points off of the turnovers of Iowa State. So those intangible things of taking care of the ball, hustle plays, being in the right spot, digging down, getting steals, and going and scoring, you can't teach that. That's read, react, that's effort, and that's what makes a good basketball team. So I just really think that's what gave Iowa the edge at the very end.
Absolutely. You can tell Iowa's so well coached. You can tell those players learned a lot from Lisa Bluter with her time with her. Now they've got Jan Jensen, who's probably teaching a lot of similar mechanics and overall IQ for the game. Iowa's fun to watch in that regard. And they've got freshmen that are stepping on the floor also. That's what I think is really promising for Iowa here also, is the freshman class they have on the floor. They're playing big time minutes for them right now. They're getting big time experience already this season. They're going to be vets before you know it. I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. And when I look at Iowa's keys to victory, and you hit some of them already, for me, Iowa took care of the basketball. They had 30 turnovers against Tennessee the previous game. It was a big emphasis in practice this week, and it paid off for them. Different style of play in this game versus that Tennessee game, but they only have 9 turnovers, took care of the ball, gets you more possessions, helps when maybe things aren't falling. And that was a huge key to me for Iowa. The second one I had on here was Sydney and Becca. Her second half was huge for Iowa. And you mentioned it, right? Like, she's been kind of hot and cold a little bit. If Iowa has another player that can step up consistently for them, you want to see Hannah Stolke produce a little bit more. She had 13 points in the game. Don't get me wrong. She does so much of the X's and O's and intangibles elsewhere. Like, she doesn't need to come out there and score a ton of points, but helpful when she does. So when you have somebody like Sydney and Becca step in and have 16 points, that's huge for them. And then the third one I had was Lucy Olson. I thought she was capable of going off for 40 in this game. Starting the game, I'm like, ooh, she's getting hot. She's doing it. But she consistently brought it throughout the game. And her mid-range game, I don't know how many times the commentator said it, her mid-range game, her mid-range game, her mid-range game. And again, if you're a young player, watch Lucy Olson and how she can score. I mean, she is capable of going out there and dropping some buckets through the hoop. And I thought she was another big key for them when she has 25 points, but also her defense. She's not coming out there and just scoring points and kind of just, lackadaisically playing defense. She was getting in passing lanes, really bringing on the defensive end also. And I think when you can get a full game like that out of Lucy Olson, that's really huge for the Hawkeyes also. Iowa has to turn around and play Michigan State on Sunday. That's a tough matchup. Michigan State is off to the best program start in history of their program, and they're in the top 25 also. So Iowa is playing back-to-back-to-back top 25 teams here. Shout out to Dean Lockwood, who was the post coach while I was at Tennessee all 4 years. He is now the assistant at Michigan State. Hell of a coach there. So I know Michigan State's going to be prepared and ready to go, but that's going to be another tough turnaround game for Iowa.
All right, let's jump into our second quarter. We're going to do a couple dabbles in the news. So jumping in, first thing just want to hit on, we had the South Carolina versus TCU game. Both were pretty top ranked, exciting game to watch. But, honestly, South Carolina came out and handled business. I think South Carolina's athleticism was just a lot for TCU to really handle. They kind of kept Sedona Prince in check. And they ended up winning 85-52. But what we really wanted to highlight was Ashlyn Watkins from South Carolina dunked during the game. I mean, you only see a dunk every now and then from crazy athletic females. Candace Parker, Lisa Leslie, Ashlyn Watkins. I think we just add her to that list and of highlights of how the game is growing, expanding, and getting better every day. What'd you think about that dunk, Sid?
It's so much fun to see those dunks. You don't see them all that often in the women's game. So I thought that was pretty cool. There was a lot of hype around the media. Like, should they lower the rim a couple inches for the women's game so you see more dunks and all this stuff? And I don't know. Totally against it. It changes all your shooting and all the reps you've done to become a good shooter, all that good stuff. It just totally changes things. I think it's a lot of smoke out there in the media. But I thought it was really cool to see that dunk, and I hope to see more of them, just not where we have to compromise it and take the rim down.
Our next topic, just to jump in quickly, we are going to just highlight little pieces about the Toronto Tempo, which is the WNBA's first international team. They will be located in Toronto, Canada. Go figure. They're set to join the league in the 2026 season. They earned its WNBA expansion franchise in May, and the Tempo became the league's 14th team after the Golden State Valkyries. And they are set to debut in the 2025 season. So as of right now, you might see in the news the Golden State Valkyries are grabbing some players from teams, going to hit the draft pretty hard. But just one thing to highlight, the Valkyries sold 20,000 season tickets.
It's so awesome.
I think it's absolutely amazing. And it's also interesting that the amount of tickets sold based on the location, right? Now we have a metric, right? We haven't had a new WNBA team pop off recently. So to hold it at 20,000, now when we go to Toronto, when they jump in, it's going to be interesting to see how many season tickets they sell right away. But super exciting, great for the league, and just great for women's basketball in general.
Absolutely. Our next topic for In the News quarter 2 is all about Caitlin Clark. So, unless you've been living under a rock, Caitlin Clark was named the 2024 Time Athlete of the Year. The only other basketball player, LeBron James.
Oh, wow.
So this is huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's so deserving for Caitlin Clark and what she's done for women's basketball. You think about the college season she had and what she was able to do in her college career leading up to that senior season for her. And then coming in, getting Rookie of the Year for the Fever, taking the Fever back to the playoffs. She just had a phenomenal rookie season. So kudos to her. A lot of hype around Caitlin Clark, obviously, but very cool to see that Taylor Swift also invited her to a Chiefs game, which seems like that would be an experience of a lifetime.
I would go.
Oh my gosh, so cool. So I love that because it's another female in Taylor Swift who is arguably one of the most famous females in the world right now, who's reaching out to another successful female and saying, hey, I respect what you're doing. Let's continue to promote each other. Let's continue to hype up each other. You need more of that, I think, from a successful woman to a successful woman. So I love that about Taylor Swift. And I love that about Caitlin Clark too, right? Like it seems like they're for the common good of elevating women. What an awesome opportunity for Caitlin Clark to go and watch that game.
Very cool. Very cool. I can't wait till Taylor Swift calls me and asks me to a game. Sid, I'll bring you. You can be my plus one.
I am in. I will ride in the trunk or a suitcase if I need to.
Oh man. Okay. So jumping into our third quarter. So we got a busy second half here. We had quite the matchup. We had our UConn versus Notre Dame, the rivalry, the feistiness, the battle of the bigs. And I'm happy to report that Notre Dame got the W by a score of 79-68. Sid, this game for a UConn Notre Dame player is filled with anxiety, a little bit of a chip on your shoulder. It's just a lot. There's a lot of prep that goes into it. It's wanting to get the win because it's a badge of honor for the rest of the season. And there was a time where UConn was undefeated for years and years and years and years at a time. So anytime you got the opportunity to say, "Hey, I gave them one," you took it. Like that, it was a huge accomplishment, and it still is, right? And UConn going into this game, they were 8-0. I do just want to add a couple quick facts, set the scene. This is UConn's first official road game. I know, right? You're like, wait, what? The first 4 games were at home. The next 4 were at neutral sites. So this is the first actual time UConn has had to play at an opposing team's gym. And this is also the first time that the Notre Dame student section has broken the previous record for students that show up for Notre Dame women's basketball games. The previous number was 640, and they broke it by having 789. I don't know why we don't get more students. We're a successful program. We have been. It's just kind of like a thing at Notre Dame. They always go to the men's games, even though they could have a bad season. They just are always there. So it's really great to see the support from the student section.
Yeah, I also want to emphasize for that being their first road game and having to play at Notre Dame in a sold out, packed arena there is a very difficult road game. I mentioned I played there before. The Notre Dame fans are into it. And you've got pockets of this across the country for sure, but there's just something about the arena that Notre Dame plays in, Parcell Pavilion. It just feels like the crowd's on top of you a little bit. It's not a huge arena, right? Like I played at Tennessee, it was 20,000 seats, pretty big arena. And Notre Dame's big, don't get me wrong, by any means there.
But
just
it's intimate.
Feels
intimate.
It feels intimate. It feels like
Yeah.
The crowd is like right there down your throat. And so that's a very tough road game. And they had mentioned that no player for UConn, no active player for UConn had played at Notre Dame yet. And I thought they could have emphasized that a little bit more.
Yeah.
With what that means for that crowd there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Looking back, I was like, man, Paige had to have played here, but with her injuries, she actually hadn't played. So yeah, that's also shocking that it was all fresh. It was a first time look for all of them. Also sad to hear that there was no AZ FUD. They wanted to, we had mentioned on our previous episode, she tweaked her knee. We were hoping she'd be ready to go for this game, but she wasn't. So it always stinks that she does, like whenever we play UConn, you absolutely want them full strength. You don't want to leave anything off the table as to, well, if we would have had so-and-so and so-and-so, but again, we didn't have Maddie. So I guess maybe we'll mark it even, I guess.
And I have to ask you, Becca, because we talked about the baby blue uniforms with the Lady Vols and it being like a cool third uniform. Notre Dame in their green and it being a green out game. Like, what does the green uniform mean for the Irish?
It means it's go time. It means all hype, turn up to the max. Everybody bring their support. It's right. It's the color that we normally don't really like you mentioned with the baby blue. But when we do, it's a special event. It's us telling the world this is a big deal for us. And I'm also just really glad we showed up for this. It's always, there's always the talk and the hype, but it's what really actually happens that I'm just super proud to see Notre Dame handling business. And I mean, we'll get to the specifics of the game, but Notre Dame is 3-0 versus top 5 ranked opponents. 3-0. They're the only team that's 3-0, right? So they took care of business against UConn, Texas, and USC. Everyone else in the rest of the country is 3-41. Can I just tell you, I love these games. I love that we're winning. There is salt in my mouth about the damn Cayman Islands and that TCU and Utah game, right? Like, it just makes you think back of, Notre Dame could be ranked number 1 if they were undefeated still. They're upsetting all these teams, what happened? And you try to look forward, but it's like, man, we just should have won those 2 as well. Right? Sid, you know where I'm coming from? Like, everybody wins when you have good games or you beat opponents that are just ranked above you, but then you lose games on games that you shouldn't have. It just makes you feel, it just makes you feel a little ick.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how the committee looks at that when it's selection time for the tournament. I think it's early enough in the season and it's a weird neutral site for those Thanksgiving tournaments. I think that will be a consideration. But it's interesting to think about what that does for Notre Dame's seed. Notre Dame could essentially go undefeated at this point, and hands down, they're going to be a number 1 seed. Like, nobody would bat an eye. But if they don't show up for some of these, I call them off games, but not like these big hype games, and they lose a couple more of those, that could knock them back to like a 2 or a 3 seed. So it's very important that they're showing up every night, and especially against some of the lesser teams that aren't the UConns, Texases, and USCs, you gotta knock those out. So that's interesting for sure for Notre Dame right now.
So jumping into the actual game itself, as we mentioned, no AZ Fudd, but we saw a couple other people kind of in and out in this game. So ball tips off, we get rolling, and I just felt Notre Dame brought the intensity. I think they really used the environment, the green uniforms, our amazing student section, and the sellout to just absolutely rock it. Came out hype, made a lot of buckets. It was great to see Liza Carlin in the game in the first quarter. She popped in and I just looked at my husband. I'm like, I've been waiting for her to come in, and I didn't expect her to play in this game, but I mean, I think she came in, got a rebound, got a putback, and then made another bunny. So 4 quick points off the bench as a player who has kind of been out of the flow. I know they've been practicing, and that's completely different. But when you're in the game in a hype environment like this, to come in after not playing since the first season opener, I think it's a big deal. Glad to see her back. Hopefully she can stay healthy and just continue to help our team keep getting better. Miles tweaks her ankle early. Kind of questionable there. She comes out, they tape her. I think they consistently just keep taping her. As we knew, Citron would be on Paige, smothering defense all the time throughout the whole game. She's really stayed on that hip, right? So when we say staying on the hip, people can set screens for Paige, but Sonia's going to stay to her outside hip. So if the screen's on the right side, Sonia's on the left side, following and chasing everywhere so that if she gets beat, she's in help side or she can recover fast. So Sonia really did, she wasn't huge and flashy point-wise for us, but she didn't have to be because her job was different. And that's what Niele highlights so much. So Sonia wants to do whatever the team needs her to do, and that's play nose-to-nose defense on Paige the entire night and hit some big buckets when we needed to. So to start the game, right, UConn had 6 turnovers in the first quarter, a bit sloppy. As I mentioned, Notre Dame was hype, coming in with the energy, crashing the offensive glass really well. They had 6 offensive boards. Hannah hit some back-to-back threes. Cass Prosper hit a 3. I mean, Hannah ends the quarter with 6 points, 4 boards, and Notre Dame as a team has 5 assists. So I'm going to mention the assists a couple times throughout this because there's a big stat I wanted to highlight later on. Second quarter, it's really Paige gets going. You know, she was bound to get going at some point. Great players always do. They find ways, they fight through it. And I just felt UConn's guards, Notre Dame played that man-to-man with help side rotation that was always seemed to be a bit late. And UConn knew that. And so they wanted to take us off the drive. They wanted to run off high screens on the wing, get it, and go drive and attack because they knew our help side was either potentially not going to be there or help side rotates over, then that whoever drove to the basket kicks it out. Like I said, Paige is a great player. She's going to get her points. And then Sarah Strong had a strong 4 points, but she did have 3 fouls. So that was something news and noteworthy, right? Her play in the second quarter, they pulled her out, 3 fouls. She now becomes somebody we want to be on target for. At halftime, Notre Dame's up 11. UConn hasn't hit a 3-pointer. They're 0 for 7, and they're being out-rebounded 25-16. Notre Dame has 10 offensive boards. Again, these are just like hustle plays, right? The rebounding and the O boards, that's all hustle. Assist-wise, UConn had 3, and Notre Dame had 11 at halftime. But again, UConn had 18 points in the paint because they were driving and driving and driving. And honestly, it kept them in the game. I know we say 11 points. They're winning by 11. But no, like, they were realizing their 3-point shot was off, so they were continuing to drive and attack the paint to get to the free throw line, which, oddly enough, there wasn't many free throws in this game. I think UConn shot 3, and that wasn't, and the actual like back-to-back was on they were in the bonus, and that wasn't until the fourth quarter. So I always think Notre Dame just has a quarter where we're just like watching one another offensively. I never really know what play we're in, and it almost seems like everybody's on an island playing a little one-on-one. Sid, do you see that when you're watching the game too, that there's always seems to be Hannah's solo, Leah too, who I know we're going to highlight in the best way possible, but it just feels like there's always a quarter we kind of get off track.
To me, that was the third quarter. I think you're dead on.
Yeah.
The first quarter, I'm thinking to myself, and it kind of ebbs and flows with Hannah, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
So she goes 0 for 4 to start the game, and then she gets rolling and never really looks back, right?
Yep.
So I'm not really knocking for her performance because she had a phenomenal game on the offensive end, but was forcing things to start the game a little bit. But also in the back of my mind, exiting that first quarter, I was like, oh, but I feel like Notre Dame's post players were getting more involved so far than we've seen in previous games, which I thought was a really good thing. You mentioned Liza comes in for the first time. Leah King, you're going to talk about, has a great game. Kate Gavall was at least a presence down there.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought you had glimpses that show that Notre Dame's post game is capable of competing with some of the best. Obviously, Sarah Strong is a phenomenal freshman for UConn. I think she's got a very promising career in front of her. And one of the best post players in the country, right? I mean, UConn's one of the best teams in the country, and that's their go-to post player. So I thought Notre Dame down low hung with them better than I thought they were going to.
Yeah. And then, Sarah Strong inside, she held it together the first half, had those 3 fouls. She comes in and hits 2 threes in the second half. She had more 3 points made than all of her teammates as a 5, as a post player, just in there to bang. I mean, that just shows her versatility. And again, jumping over to Leah King for Notre Dame, rebounded her butt off. I mean, all throughout the game, her mid-range jumper, you could tell she was going to pull it, and you could tell she was going to knock it down because her shot looked confident. She was looking for her shot. And then afterwards, she was rebounding. There's no better way, whether you are a 10% percentage from the field or 100. If you're going to shoot it and then go to the glass, get those boards for your shot and anyone else's, I think any coach in the nation would be like, yeah, you can shoot it. Right? Like you're crashing the glass harder than anybody else. I mean, she was a menace on the offensive glass.
Yeah, I'm a huge Leah King fan. I think I've mentioned a couple of times how much I like watching her play. And I think she brings something a little bit different for Notre Dame down low. And to see her have the game that she had against UConn, I think just should add to her confidence even more and what she means to that team. You mentioned Olivia Miles tweaks her ankle a little bit, still has 16 points in the game, but still wasn't quite in the flow like she is sometimes. Because of that, I think it kind of took her out of her game a little bit. You certainly have Hannah that steps up. And I think it's really interesting watching Hannah. Do I think Hannah's one of the best guards in the country? Absolutely. Right? She is explosive. She can score on all three facets of the game. Her defense she's probably the best defender in the country, right? Like what she's able to do to disrupt the ball and how she plays so fast and so tenacious on defense and how she's into it. But it's really interesting to see down the stretch here for Notre Dame. If Hannah's having an off night and if she continues to try to force possessions and continues to try to be the star in every game, I think it's going to be telling for me the moment where she starts distributing the ball a little bit. And granted, I mean, she had 8 assists tonight. I'm not saying that she doesn't do these things. She does naturally, but you can tell she is the one that's wanting to score all the time. And it's a different mentality from a point guard, right? Where old school basketball, you're taught that the point guard distributes the ball a little bit more, gets players involved. Whereas I think Hannah's trying to get herself involved a little bit more first. And it works, right? Like they beat UConn tonight, number 2 team in the country. Hannah goes off, has a great game. But what if she is truly having an off night? I want to see how she steps up as a leader and she can truly get everyone else involved and equally score as many points for Notre Dame by distributing the ball, by involving her post game more, by continuing to evolve Olivia Miles, Sonia Citron more. We talk about this, like Sonia Citron is so capable on the offensive end, brings it on defense every game without a doubt. That's the thing for me is like, as Hannah Hidalgo evolves her game, and certainly as she goes to play at the next level in a couple of years, can she establish that type of leadership where she's getting everyone involved and also getting hers? That's going to be, to me, that's the interesting thing in her game right now.
Yeah. Also, I think our post, Leah Two's been up and down, right? This was the first game I think she demanded the ball on rebounds. I mean, she was at one point like climbed up on Paige to get a rebound, and that level of effort, you reward players like that, right? The team feeds off of it. Kate Caval is still learning the game, still a freshman, still young. She has had some great tests to go up against, but for sure still learning the game, right? For somebody who's had to come in, start as a freshman who's 6'5", because you're probably 6'5" and we have a short bench and yeah, let's go. It's great. It's going to be great for her in the long run. It's just the ebbs and flows she's learning. But I think Hannah tonight, I saw a couple times when she wasn't making some shots, or maybe she turned the ball over or someone else turned the ball over, she would like jog back a little slower on defense. She'd ask for somebody else to come take the ball in. Like you could tell she was tired and was slightly frustrated, right? In her play or not making a shot or what we were doing. So I think that's just another mental aspect of the game that she's going to continue to learn. But she's just so tenacious and like her energy is infectious that she can have a night or have runs that happens and still have 29 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists, be 2 assists short of a triple-double. And I don't know if you knew this fact, but no D1 player since 1986 has had a triple-double on UConn. I was hoping she'd be the first since then, but overall, two assists short, but just a great game. I think we saw some coaching adjustments, especially at halftime. I think Gino, he Gino'd. He made some adjustments. At times you saw them switch from man to zone, then switch back. But I mean, props to the UConn guards because they stayed the course. They continued to drive in the paint, tried to get to the free throw line. They ended up having end of game points in the paint were 36-20 in favor of UConn. Turnovers were dead even for both teams at 13. This is the difference maker, I feel. Stat-wise, 3-point field goal percentage, UConn was 18%. They were 3 of 16. And Notre Dame was 10 of 18 for 55% from the three. I mean, in a normal game, if you're shooting over 30% from three, you're really excited about it, right? 55, like that's everybody was hitting. And the last little add-on I wanted to say is UConn is third in the nation with 22 assists per game. That was what they were averaging. They were held to 10 assists tonight. So again, I think, but the style of the game was different for them. They had to drive the paint. Notre Dame's defense was forcing them to put the ball on the ground, right? So I think that had something to do with it. But all in all, Hannah, as we mentioned her stats, but Leah Two King, 16 points, 12 boards, nice double-double. As you mentioned, Miles, 16 points. And Sonia had a quiet 7, but they were 7 when we absolutely needed them down the stretch. And that's kind of Sonia's thing, making the great play, hitting the bucket when we need to, getting the stop when we need to. So I thought it was all in all a good Notre Dame performance and a great game to watch. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hannah did raise the occasion there, right? Like I'm not trying to full on knock her. I think she's going to continue to mature. And the more she does that, the better she's going to be. And at some point down the road, we might be saying Hannah's the best player in the country.
Yeah.
Right. I think Paige has earned that. She's a senior. She had some injuries, came back, battled through that, has brought so much to UConn and so much to the women's game. But if Hannah continues on this trajectory and Notre Dame is capable of making Final Fours, which they are, and they actually do it, we're going to be hearing about Hannah Hidalgo. And then she's probably going to bring Olivia Miles with her. Olivia Miles is capable of doing a lot of this stuff too. I think Hannah maybe has a little bit more of that X factor because of her tenaciousness. But wow, it's so much fun to watch her play. And by far one of the best guards that I've seen play the game in a long time. She just brings something different, which is so much fun. It's refreshing to watch Hannah play for full 40 minutes that she plays. So if I look at this game and you think about Gino and his style of coaching, he's the best coach out there right now. He's got the most wins, the most national championships. Some of the best players that have played the game have played under him. And then you look at Notre Dame, and we talked about last episode, Neil Ivey and her experience and what she brings and what Notre Dame brings to the table. Both of these programs are at that next level, top tier. And so when you watch both of them play each other, it's great basketball. We talk about the chess match and both coaches making adjustments within the game, which I think certainly happened. I thought UConn's zone, when they went to the zone in the third quarter, made a huge difference for them. They were able to cut the game to only being down by 2 with around 2 minutes to go in the third quarter. They were down by 11 at halftime. I thought that zone got them back in it a little bit. They switched back to their man. And then before you know it, in the fourth quarter, Notre Dame got that momentum, went on another run and kind of put it out of reach. But the biggest thing that I look at, and I talk about the seasonness of Gino and Niel and what they bring. Both teams had 13 turnovers. So how many games, Becca, have we watched this year where we're like, okay, this team only had 13 turnovers, but the other team had 21, or the other team had 18, or the other one. Both of these teams took care of the ball. Is 13 an exceptional turnover stat? No, but it's a good turnover stat when you're playing against a really good team like both these teams were tonight.
And UConn had 6 turnovers in the first quarter. So think about that. Handling the ball, taking care of it for the rest of the next 3.
It's the next tier, I think, when we're watching Notre Dame versus UConn tonight versus some of the other matchups that we watched, right? So far, this has been one of the better games to me, top to bottom. I thought that both teams really executed when they wanted to execute. Obviously, UConn falls short here, but I really think Notre Dame is the real deal. They just got to, I think it's the maturity thing. They got to get through that.
Yeah.
And you've got the season to do it. When I was coaching, when I was playing, we would talk about this when I was at Tennessee. You got to peak at the right time. In Notre Dame, if they can peak at the right time in March Madness, who's stopping them right now? I don't think anyone's stopping them. Not if they're showing up and showing out like they're capable of doing.
Yeah, I guess I'll take us peaking at the right time with those 2 losses over the Thanksgiving break, then it being later on in the year, right? Just a couple additional little tidbits. No team has beat Gino Auriemma more than Notre Dame. 15 of 162 losses in his career were Notre Dame. Neal is now the 5th coach to beat Gino in 3 straight games in the last 30 seasons. It's a big deal. And the last thing, just like the star power, right? We've talked about Hannah, we've talked about Paige, and we've talked about these two, but the freshman front courts for both teams. The number 1 overall 2024 recruit was Sarah Strong from UConn. And the number 5 2024 recruit was Kate Cavall from Notre Dame. Both freshmen, both starting, both impacting the game, learning it, growing, and getting better. I mean, we talk about, there's an amazing sophomore class this year, right? With Audie Crooks, Hannah. I mean, there's people from everyone that we've talked about and highlighted previously. But think about just the freshman women that are getting exposure early to some crazy environments, amazing competition, and overall competitive games. And it's only December 12th. It is December 12th. It's early. It's just crazy. And I think it's super exciting. And that's why we have our podcast, so we can talk about it.
Yeah, we're about to head into conference play coming up here, and that's going to be insane. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to get through conference play.
Yeah.
Like
survive.
You take the ACC and the Big 12, and I take the Big 10, the SEC. Like, we're going to have to figure it out, because there's going to be so many good matchups within conference play also. That's going to bring a whole different dynamic to what we're trying to cover, which I think is going to be almost like a whole new season. All right, let's head into our 4th quarter, and it's our In the News Part 2. So this one is an interesting one, Becca. I had come across this just doing a little research, and in the Sports Business Journal, to be specific. And I think from my end, it jumped out to me because I had done a research project when I was getting my executive MBA at Notre Dame a few years ago. It was 2019 when I was doing this project, and it was around NIL. NIL hadn't really dropped yet, but we kind of knew that there was something lingering out there. And so I had a strategic foresight class at Notre Dame, and I did a 55-page paper on the future of NIL. So what it could look like, I had graphs, I had charts. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all text for 55 pages. That would have been insane. But it was really mapping out, what is this going to look like for the future of college sports? And what does it mean for players at the collegiate level to actually get paid for their name, image, and likeness? That's been a huge thing that we've seen come through the past few years here. And it happened almost overnight. It's weird to look back just a few years ago and think, wow, I can't believe that wasn't happening. It's almost become the norm already a little bit. If you think about the next step of this, and again, this was in the Sports Business Journal, there's an article right now about, in the future, will some colleges start to sell their teams to ownership groups, to private equity? It's the next wave of big change for college athletics. So in the article, it mentions Avenue Capital Group Chair, CEO, and co-founder Mark Larcy. He recently spoke with Turner Sports' Dave Briggs about the potential introduction of private equity into the college sports space. It is a phenomenal opportunity, is what he says. He says, I think you're going to see a number of schools selling their teams. Flat out says it. He says, to folks like us, meaning these big, powerful people who are making these big decisions to go purchase teams, he says, we're bidding on a couple teams right now. So I think some of this is already in the works. What's interesting to think about is, what are the NCAA limitations around this? Are there any? But what he's saying is, what they would essentially do is they would buy 51% of the teams. So we're not talking about entire athletic programs at this point, but specifically they're looking at football programs and basketball programs. So we know that a lot of these big tier programs, football's making the most money, men's basketball is making the second most, and then in some cases, women's basketball. We watched these 2 rivalries this week, and it was a packed house in Iowa. It was a packed house in South Bend. So we know that they're starting to sell more tickets, and they have been for a while in the women's game. Don't get me wrong. Women's game is potentially on this scene also. So Lasry says one of the things they want to do is say, okay, great. My football program makes $100 million. And some of these big football programs are. You think about the top tier programs, Ohio State, Notre Dame football, Alabama football. You can go on and on. Texas, Tennessee, some of the Big Ten programs, they're bringing in, call it $50 million to $100 million on their football programs alone. And then you throw in some of the basketball programs, you can even add to that. They're going to say to themselves, okay, if my football program makes $100 million a year and we sell 51% of that, or we sell 50% of that, so we were talking $50 million, you do a 10 multiple on that, a 15 multiple on that in some cases. So $500 to $750 million is what these folks are going to come at these schools with and say, we want to purchase a stake of your football program, your basketball program, a combination of both. Who knows what it's going to look like? And what's enticing to these schools is right now, they want to turn around and they want to get recruits. They need money for NIL. But right now, what's tough for these schools is you can't go out and raise money for NIL because it's not a deduction for the people that want to give to NIL. And he believes that the private equity money could be the stopgap that changes that. So you're going to eventually potentially see private equities and ownership groups come at these schools with giant price tags, $750 million, maybe $1 billion. Maybe you're talking, like I mentioned, Texas and Ohio State, some of the most grossing programs out there. And somebody comes at him with $1 billion and says, hey, we want to purchase a big stake of your program. How interesting is that to think about? And what does that mean down the road for women's basketball? Does women's basketball get a seat at this table where eventually the women's basketball program is getting bought out by private equities or big buying groups? What do you think about this one, Becca?
I think this is another layer of a mess for the NCAA to try to figure out. Don't get me wrong. It's absolutely awesome that it's being seen like a business you can buy. And that's absolutely where and what NIL did to college sports, right? It's now a business. Gino said it in one of his interviews. Let's call it what it is. It's semi-professional sports. It's no longer student athletes. So thinking and planning out of price tags and net worth and generating revenue and what a program is really worth is just nuts to me. I think it's crazy to wrap my head around because that's just not something you see in the college game, obviously. But how does this legally all go down? How does this contractually all go down? How does the NCAA monitor and maintain and try to control maximums? Like it's a whole different ballgame. And if it's already happening, that's even crazier to me. And if it's already happening and it eventually does happen, I 1,000% think women's basketball will be a part of that conversation. Because I know at some schools where you have some hardcore alumni, you got some donors in there, they see the value in it. And I know some of these women's programs are a lot bigger than the men's at certain schools, and that's just the way it is. It's the ebb and flow of the season, the recruits, the coaches. It just happens. But I think it's a whole nother level and layer of complexity.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is you'll hear folks say, will student athletes eventually be employees of the schools?
Oh my gosh.
And this kind of
Crazy.
maybe this turns it the other way where you might become an employee of this group that buys out whatever team and school you're playing for. And does that totally shift some of that dynamic for players? And you mentioned student athlete, and I think we are really going further and further away from that. You are really becoming a professional athlete when you go to play for some of these schools. And to be honest, we talked about it, all the transfers coming into this year. It was the record. Over 1,300 kids or women entered the transfer portal heading into this season. So already in my mind, I'm like, what does that do for you scholastically when you're just jumping schools? How does that work? You played at Notre Dame. Can you imagine how prestigious of a school that is? And you've got players that are transferring into Notre Dame. Like, how does that even work from a scholastic standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's there's a lot of oddities with the transfer portal and what that's done to student athlete. And then you talk the business side of it. And that's really also an interesting thing. And you've got some players that have to take online classes. Angel Reese probably couldn't have gone to class last year. Caitlin Clark probably couldn't have gone to class last year. They'd have been hounded by kids, right? They're some of the biggest celebrities on campus now. Yes, the football player. You've got Archie Manning down there at Texas, and he's probably getting hounded. And big man Notre Dame quarterback's probably getting hounded also. But I think you're starting to see it with women's basketball players. Hannah Hidalgo walking around campus is probably getting a lot of attention. So it's just when you look at all different facets, it feels like it's coming from everywhere right now where it's really shaping college, big-time Division I sports into, and you mentioned it, a business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just last thing I just wanted to add is when you hit on the transfer portal and kind of being employees of the college, a lot of girls or athletes, anyone who goes into the transfer portal, not all your credits transfer to a new school, right? So I know a lot of schools specifically don't take online classes, or they have a higher GPA than the NCAA requires. So there's little limitations and little standards. They're not little. They're the school standards, and if you don't meet those, they're automatically out. So you go into a transfer portal hoping for a new opportunity, but it's instantly like, okay, that one I can't go to because of XYZ. This one has a GPA of you know what I mean? So there's also a layer there that folks need to understand. When you go in and you risk, yes, you're making dollars and cents. And I know that's kind of probably where a lot of college athletes are wanting and thinking right now. That's why we have certain teams that are getting more stacked than others. But it's 4 years. And I think now it used to be 4 years for the next 40 years of your life, right? You get your education, you use it in business. Now that 4 years is a different business all in itself. You can make a certain amount of money here in this business and this space that can propel you into your next career, whether it's playing pro or in marketing or business management. Maybe you become an agent. It's definitely continuing to add pages and pages of complexity, but also more opportunities. So definitely interesting. I'm mad I wasn't there for the NIL. I wish I would have made a little pocket change, but I'm also glad because it just seems like it could add a lot of frustration, or maybe even regrets, or wanting to change and maybe hit the transfer portal for different reasons. It's a tangled web we're living in, Sid.
Yeah, I think we'll look back and at the start of all of the NIL changes to where this really levels out, and we're going to think to ourselves, wow, how much has college sports really changed?
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, we're talking some of these top tier programs, but then what happens to the MAC schools and to the smaller Division I schools? How do you even try to compete against some of these other big programs that are getting all the NIL hype and they're getting the top tier players no matter what at that point? And so maybe you can argue it's always kind of been that way, but even more so, like, I just don't see how some of these lower or smaller level D1s even continue to try to compete, especially in football, but also in women's basketball.
It'll be interesting to keep a pulse check on that. That's for sure. You've ended this with such some. I'm over here pondering and thinking. I'm probably not going to sleep much tonight. Just thinking about how much money I missed out on in college. Just kidding.
Yeah, and maybe this doesn't even happen. Maybe the NCAA, there's different NCAA rules out there and regulations where it stops all of this. Who knows? I just came across that in a credible journal there and thought it was pretty interesting.
Absolutely. All right. Well, a quick recap of our episode 11 here. Our first quarter, we dug into a Iowa State versus Iowa game. Iowa took the win in that in-state rival. We had some nice in the news there with college athletes dunking in games. Always good to see. Our third quarter, we saw Notre Dame get a nice W against UConn. And then Sid brought up some thinking material for our fourth quarter for our in the news part too. So does the college sports become a business all in itself and is able to be sold and bought and merged? Who knows?
Yeah, don't forget to hit us up on our socials. We'd like to hear from you. And looking forward to the next one, Becca. Hope you have a good one.
Thanks. You too, Sid. See ya. That's the 28.5 final buzzer for today's episode. Don't forget to hit follow on your preferred podcast platforms to catch every play-by-play. New episodes drop each week throughout the season.
If you've enjoyed our courtside chat, drop us a review or follow us on our social media accounts. And remember, from females who have played the game, the size of the ball matters.